My name is Robin Dreeke. I'm the retired chief of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program and the CEO of People Formula, Leadership and Communication Strategies. And on today's show, I'm going to be sharing with you the 6 signs of who you can trust and assessing their behavior for the most important thing in the world, and that is strong, effective leadership, free of any power, manipulation, or subterfuge. Stand by.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Thank you for joining us. Let me ask you, what do you need to do, to up-level your leadership? How important is trust? Well, the answer is obviously massively important. But how do you know that your team sees you as trustworthy? And moreover, how can you reliably assess the trustworthiness of others? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind and your soul have been craving. It's a chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about Grammy Award-winning entertainers, entrepreneurs, skeptics, quantum physicists, holy people, philosophers, neuroscientists, astronauts. It's across the board. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant, so please go over there to wherever you tune in. Do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And you can also listen via Google Home or Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right. Let's strip it down and dive right in. We all know that to lead successfully sometimes requires a massive amount of trust. But how can you reliably assess trust in your team members before it actually needs to be tested? Let's face it, if you have to wait until you're facing a crisis to find out if you can trust someone, it's already too late. But what if there was a 6-step very practical, pragmatic signs that you could walk yourself and walk your team through that could really empower you and your team? Well, stay with us, because that's where we're going today, because my guest is returning champion and dear friend, Robin Dreeke. Robin is a retired FBI special agent and chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. He is a best-selling author, professional speaker, trainer, and facilitator. Robin has taken his life's work of recruiting spies, yes, I did say spies, and broken it down into the art of leadership, communication, and relationship building into the 5 steps to trust and the 6 signs of who you can trust. Since 2010, Robin has been working with large organizations in every aspect of business, whether it's newly promoted leaders, executives, sales teams, customer relations. Robin has crafted his people formula for quick results and maximal success. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the CEO of People Formula, author, speaker, world leader in trust elicitation, my man, Robin Dreeke.
How do you not love Dov Baron? I mean,
It's good to have you, mate. Always an honor and a pleasure to have a chat with you. I'm really glad to have you on.
it's more my pleasure and honor because I learn more from you in 3 minutes than from 30 books a month I try to read or a year. I mean, you are a sage and a godsend to everyone you communicate with. So I thank you for that.
Oh, hold on a second. I got to grease my ears so I can get out of the door because my head's getting too big. Cheers, guys. So, there's a lot we can get into here, and I really want to get into it because you are a master of understanding trust. You wrote the Code of Trust, and you've done your other books, but I really want to go to this first. In the context of leadership itself, the question I want to ask you is, what is the problem we need to be addressing? What is the question we need to answer that people are not looking at, not really answering yet? Because you and I, we're sort of in there, nitty gritty, dirty, getting in it, but we also both really enjoy this view of like, let's look at this and see what the actual problem is. What do you see as the problem we're not solving that we need to?
I'm hoping it's what we were talking about, before and multiple times, and that is, I think people misidentify what they actually believe leadership to be.
Yeah.
And that is, we're groomed from a very young age to idolize the popular and to see how many likes you can get and how many retweets you can sustain and how many followers you can have. And we assume that with those actions that these people are leaders, which is completely the problem. Those things are actions of power and popularity, which are exceptionally self-centered. And they're going for title and position and notoriety, which is self-centered. And leadership, the bedrock of leadership is being of service to others, to understand goals, objectives, and priorities and inspire people to achieve the greatness that they want to achieve. And that's the problem I think most people are having these days, is that all the social media platforms, our politicians, everyone is leveraging popularity for power, which is not leadership. And so they're serving themselves and not others.
So I think that is beautifully stated, that people are assuming that popularity is leadership. Whether you look at that at the high level of politics at the president of the United States level, or whether you look at that as an Instagram bathing suit model, oh, well, there's millions of people following this person, they must be a leader. They're popular, but that's not leadership. And I love that you brought that right up front, because when it's about popularity, as you said, that becomes about leveraging that power. So talk to us, and this is a conversation you and I have had privately, and I'm going to challenge you to come forward a little bit with it, because I know that you and I have a similar sort of moral stand that's not religious or right and wrong, but more of like checking self.
Yeah.
And checking the impact that we have. So talk to us about this distinction between leadership and power, because they're often conflated and they're quite different.
Yeah. And I'm assuming it's referring to, my greatest, the standout humbling moment in my life is when I was a new Marine Corps officer and I was ranked last out of all the second lieutenants. It was startling to me. Luckily I was only, and I'll go into how this all happened, but luckily I was born with only one gift, and that is I never placed the blame of my circumstances on anyone else. I owned it all the time. Right. And so when that happened, I was like, all right, the rest of the world's not screwed up. I must be doing something wrong. So what had happened was this. I'm a gregarious, outgoing guy. I'm an extrovert. I grew up in the Northeast here in the United States, and so I was popular in high school. I was on the football team, track. I wasn't the most popular, but I'm in the yearbook for most flirtatious, and I had a great time. I enjoyed socializing a great deal, and because of that popularity, I was given titles and positions like, class president or treasurer and all these clubs and team captain and all these things, because I was trying to go to the Naval Academy, which is more leadership. And I had assumed very, very wrongly, and it wasn't totally my fault. It's society's fault. I was just having a talk with a bunch of teachers yesterday, as a matter of fact, that when at a young age you have a behavior that gets reinforced, entitled something, you believe that to be true because during those formative years of our lives, I mean, you are the neuroscience expert. These imprints happen.
Yep.
And so my imprint of leadership was that I am popular, I must be a good leader.
Right.
And again, that was all about me. Then you couple on top of that, I grew up, in a financially, challenged situation where I had to be exceptionally self-reliant. So I worked hard for myself to make money for myself so I could at least buy some school clothes, so I could actually get to work, all these things, self-reliance, popularity. It was me, me, me. Not that I was, egocentric, narcissistic, or anything like that. It was muscle memory around self-importance, self-inflation. And so I thought, because of this popularity, I must be a natural born leader because I'm naturally just being this personality. Well, fast forward it through the Naval Academy. You got the Naval Academy happening, and which is, again, it's just high school on steroids, like a lot of universities. There's leadership there, but most things inside of organizations like government are managerial.
Yeah.
It's processes and things. Again, no accountability. In other words, your life is not accountable to someone else's because it's training.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 4 years of high school, 4 years of the Naval Academy, and now I hit the real world of leadership as a young junior officer. And when I was ranked 14 out of 14, I go to my major. I said, "All right, sir, I get it. I'm doing something wrong. What is it?" And he says, "Oh, that's easy. You need to be a better leader." Again, I was like, okay, I thought I was. Look, I'm everyone likes me. I'm popular. And he goes, no, no, no. You need to make it about everyone else but yourself.
Right.
I had no idea what he's talking about.
And I just want to pause that for a second,
yeah.
because I think that's where much of modern society is. And I was going to say younger people, but it's not true, because we've seen presidential based on popularity, right?
Yep.
Not based on. So this conflation, it's not just external in the world, it's being magnified externally in the world, it's being compounded in the social media world, but it's a lot of it's inside our own head. Like I love what you just said there. It's the greatest example. A lot of people follow me, I must be a good leader. As opposed to and this is, again, in servant leadership, which you and I talk about too, is it's about how can I serve, not who's following me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, when you got to that place, and he said, make it about everyone else, not about you. Did that make sense at that moment?
No,
I can't imagine it did. So talk to us a little bit about, like, that must have been really confusing. All these people love me. I've got a big following, and yet I scored the lowest in leadership. And now you want me to make it about other people? Aren't I doing that because everybody follows me?
and if the camera was a little clearer, you'd see me messing up. It was heart shattering, is what it was, because when you're a caring human being, like I was, still am, and like you are, when you hear from someone you respect how much you suck at being a caring human being, it's devastating.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do about it? Now you got to lean in. Now you have to figure it out. That was the gauntlet that was thrown down that said, now it's time to begin the work. And I examined, I was, luckily for my life, I've been placed in situations that required leadership, and I was surrounded by, like us all, some great ones and some horrendous ones. And you just sit back as a human behaviorist, which we all are, and you observe the cause and effect of our impact on others. And you get input and guidance. You have teachers, mentors, and guides that are your loving critics that you can constantly get that feedback from, that they're vested in your success objectively. and you just start doing the work. I mean, it's every single day. You do the work, you lean in, you have an aha moment, you incorporate that aha moment to the next. And so, one of my favorite authors right now is from Atomic Habits, because it's a compounding effect of one small habit a day forever. And it's not just accelerating, it compounds and pays that dividend. So you just start creating those habits and understanding. And this is what I love about it. It's not about changing who you are. It's about understanding what to add to yourself, because we all have greatness, and all these things we have are fine and wonderful. It's just, how do you mitigate them? How do you balance that dichotomy? I love these dichotomies, because even when exploring, this concept of power, I originally totally negated that power is completely horrible. It's wrong. Well, it's actually a function of life.
Cool.
There's, it'd be great, and there are a few rare organizations and institutions that actually promote from within, from pure leadership and that kind of background. That is the rare exception. They do exist,
Yep.
but you actually have to understand these rules of power and popularity to get the position, so you have the opportunity to lead, but you have to have the self-awareness to now shut it off and let's start leading. And
See, that's the key.
Yes,
That's the key. You recognize that you need the popularity, you need the power manipulation skills to get to the top in that organization, because you want to change it.
Yes.
Right? That's fine. But the problem is, when you've bathed in that water long enough, you've now been seduced by it.
What a great analogy.
The problem is, you get up to that, you get back into that, and now you stink of it. You stink of the power, you stink of the seduction, you stink of all the things, the manipulation. And now you're talking about, well, no, we need to change this a little bit. Well, you know what? You were the example, buddy. And I watched you use power, use manipulation, use those things to get to the top. Yeah, you're saying this, but it's incongruous with the fact that you didn't do it. So you know what? That's claptrap, and we're not listening.
Yeah.
So it's a very, this is one of the discussions you and I have around these bigger questions, which is, do you change something from within? And if you do, how do you show that you've changed? That's the important thing. Not that I'm changing the system, but I've changed.
Yes.
I saw Jack Welch speak many years ago before he died. And I used to really dislike Jack Welch when he was the CEO of what was it? Not GM. Who was it? General Electric, right? I mean, he was massive, and I respected him that he'd come up from nothing. Enormous respect for that. But he had the policy of fire the bottom 20%.
Yep.
Like every month, clean them out, right? And I really thought it was so lacking in compassion and empathy and looking at how you develop your people. And I just disliked it enormously. And then I saw him speak at the World Business Conference a few years ago, like probably 8-9 years ago, before he died. And he talked about the generosity gene. He completely changed his tune. And he talked about it, you can't, if you have an organization where you fire people and they're surprised, you're the problem. You have to have the generosity gene and offer them coaching, and so that if you fire them, there's no surprise. They go, yeah, I didn't step up. But that was very hard, because even for me, who, I didn't know about that side of him, I just held him in that framework of the ruthless power leader. And so this is part of the challenge of if you're going to come up inside of the organization and you use the old school process, and now you want to do the new school, do I really trust you? I don't know. Which is interesting, because we're talking about trust.
Right.
So let's talk about trust from that point. Let's talk about what is trust. I mean, you are the expert. You wrote the code of trust. You understand what trust really is, and you obviously you recruited spies. So talk to us, give us a definition so people understand it, because I think it's a subjective thing that people are like, yeah, well, I kind of trust him. No, you don't. You trust or you don't.
And this is a great point. I like trying to take the intuitiveness out of it and make it very observable and repeatable. Right. And so for trust, for me, it's consistently repeatable observational behavior, that you are consistently predictable. Because once I can consistently see you doing something a certain way, whether I like you or not, trust to me removes liking or disliking from the equation. Because that's a very subjective, emotional based input that will blind you towards predictable behavior. Because then you start having this thing called hope. creep in. I hope he'll be better next time.
Right.
I hope she doesn't do this again. Well, why would they change? Because if I see a pattern of predictable behavior, I know exactly what you're going to do. And the other thing that's exceptionally predictable, which makes you trustworthy, not trustworthy like I like you or you're going to do good or bad things. It's just I can predict you, is that you are always going to act in your own best interests according to what you think is in your best interest in terms of safety, security, and prosperity for yourself and those you care about. If I can figure out what you think that is, I can now trust you to take actions all the time in terms of your best interest, which could be philanthropy, taking care of others, being a good leader. But at the same time, if you are the power hungry, title position seeker, I can now trust you're going to predictably do that and take those actions, behaviors each time.
So that's really interesting to me, because I remember that when you and I were speaking together a couple of years ago in Florida, and and that piece, I think, was a piece that really sort of tweaked some people, that everybody is always going to act in their own best interests.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of like, it's what you just said about predictability is not about whether I like you. It's just that this is a predictable pattern of behavior. This is what I know. And I can see this. And so it is on me to pay attention to that. Yes. And deal with that at that level. So, I know somebody very well who is a pretty wonderful human being in many things, but I know that this person has a very, very hot trigger around a certain subject. So I know, don't have that discussion, right? Absolutely. With that person. That's a hot button that is beyond anything that makes any rationale or any logic. This person will just blow up. And it's just, okay, if I want them to blow up, then I know the button to push, right? But that for me is very interesting, is that people will always operate in their own best interest. But that's, again, not bad or good. Again, it's looking at it and going, okay, if I assume this person is always going to operate in their best interest, now I can find out what their best interest is. Right. That's the next level of it. Is that right?
Absolutely, because it forces, again, for someone who spent his entire life focusing on me and my popularity, understanding this forces me outside of myself and forces me to look at other people without judging it, just understand. And this is the other thing about it too. Trust to me isn't like all or nothing. I trust you or I don't trust you, because trust is in lanes. It's in vectors, exactly. Because I mean, I wouldn't trust, Dov, do you fly a plane? Are you a pilot?
No.
I would trust you with a lot of things in my life, a lot of things, but I would not throw you the keys to the plane and say, all right, fly us around.
or dentistry.
Or there's another one. See, again, and it has nothing to do with me liking or disliking you. Exactly. It's predictable behavior. So, and I know people, it does ruffle feathers when I say people are acting in their best interests. So that's why I always try to expand that best interest is, my best interest. So like my best interests are my children. My best interests are my friends, their prosperity, how they're feeling today. I mean, you and I were talking about, we have mutual family and friends in Australia. And I hadn't heard from a friend in about 2 months. And I was literally, and I've never met her in person. Met her through Hagnaggy. And right. I reached out to her because I was so concerned, because I knew she was having a hard time with a lockdown. She just had a job change. And so that's what it's about, is deeply understanding people at a deep level so you can make that great connection. Because as we both know, relationships, good, healthy, strong relationships are the bedrock for absolutely everything. And that's what leaders do. They proactively create these great relationships, especially this last year. I know you've been through some amazing challenges. Without relationships, we're alone. And it's psychologically the most damaging thing we can go do.
Well, we know that, right? I mean, isolation, I've written some things on this and done some work on it and done some videos on it, that isolation is a form of torture.
Oh, it's horrendous.
Right. And so we know that if you're going to torture people, you isolate them. It's a simple form of torture. And, we've all had to do that to some degree. And some of it, I talked about this, and, you talk about relationships being the bedrock. Well, some people have been in isolation with somebody they don't like.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a marriage that there was not a good marriage, but they were distracted enough because they could go to work or they could go to this or they could go to that. And now they're like, oh, I have to be home with you, you asshole, every day. Oh
Can you
my
imagine?
God. Right.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. We're going to see a divorce rate. I think we're also going to see a massive divorce rate. So suddenly realizing, oh, I don't like you.
And not just a divorce rate. I bet you just a lack of willingness to commit, to relationships to begin with, because they're afraid of having to be stuck with them.
Exactly. So it's going to be very interesting. So in the context of, I just want to help people to grasp this, because this is such an important point, Robin, which is this piece around people who are going to operate in their best interest. Elicitation of that. How would you guide, in the last few minutes, we've got to this part one of the show.
Mm-hmm.
How would you guide our listeners, our viewers, to elicit that from the person?
Sure. To me, the easiest way to elicit that is because basically those best interests are the person's priorities. What's important to them, their needs, wants, dreams, aspirations, personal and professional, long-term, short-term, all these aspects of them. To me, the easiest way to find that out and discover it is discover what their challenges are. I think the easiest thing to do is just ask that open-ended question. You can start in the short terms, like, hey, what kind of challenges have you faced this week? I mean, you and I, before we chatted, we're talking about the challenges of lockdown, in Canada and British Columbia compared to Virginia, compared to Australia. That's a challenge. And so when you hear challenges, I start hearing your priorities. And now when I start hearing your priorities, I start observing your behavior and the actions you take in furtherance of those priorities. I can now start predicting your behavior because you're going to act in your best interest according to your priorities and challenges.
So give us an example of pretending that you're an executive talking to a senior leader, and you know this person's got better in them. You want to bring them up, but you've not worked out yet what's in their own best interest. You've not worked out what their priorities are. Give us a couple of guideline questions that would bring that out for our leaders.
Maybe, a good question I love asking a lot of people is say, so where do you see yourself in 5 years from now or 3 years from now? What kind of challenges you think you're going to face along the way? And what kind of resume are you trying to build for yourself? Because that's then going to give me an understanding of how you see yourself and where you see yourself. And that's going to identify for me what your priorities are. And then because, human beings are very good when you're actually vested in someone else, of being that loving critic. So you can be objective for them, help them towards those goals and objectives without being tied to the outcome, because that's what great mentors are. So that's if I understood your question right, that's the way I elicit, hey, where do you see yourself? How do you see yourself? Yeah. And another great one too, I love gauging a person's level of self-awareness as well. And so I always, one of the favorite questions is, hey, tell me what, if your boss or supervisor was to write your review right now from their perspective, not yours, what would they say your strengths were and what would they say your weaknesses are?
So we got to come to the end of the show, this part of the show, but that right there, you finished on the point that I was going to go to, which is self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because even when you're asking, if you are a emotionally intelligent, emotionally mature leader, asking those questions, there's an assumptive level of self-awareness of the other person that may be false. So oftentimes people don't know the answer. They make up shit that they think is true, but it's actually not true if you were to find out under stress. There's a wonderful saying in psychology, under stress, we regress.
All right.
And so, we can all be pretty moral and high grounded when things are good. But when you're up against that wall, it's a different story. So I want to go through in our next part these 6 signs of trust that you've laid out so beautifully, and have our leaders really grasp how to step into those on themselves and on the people that they're leading. So for you, dear listener, please stay tuned. We're going to come back in part 2 of the show. We'll just be one click away. We're here with our special guest, Robin Dreeke, who is the world's leading understanding of how to elicit trust in others and how to elicit what makes them trustworthy, as well as trustworthy in yourself. So stay tuned. We will be back in 2 clicks. So just stay with us. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.